All right, my name is Dan Wilga, and I'm going to be talking about a module that we started writing way back in 2006 with Drupal 4.7 called Monster Menus, and the ways that it can be used to either integrate with the multi-site feature of Drupal or to completely supplant the need for it, which is actually sort of what we do at Amherst College. So you can see some information about me here. My email address, drupal@dwilgalinux1.amherst.edu if you want to write on D.O, I'm Gribnif, and this is the project address. Probably the easiest thing to do is to write down this number here, amherst.edu/441763. That'll quickly redirect you to the Prezi, which is what you're looking at, the presentation. 441763. It's easier to remember than this huge string of characters that they give you for a Prezi. All right. So Amherst College, in case you don't know, and you probably don't, we're a small liberal arts college located in western Massachusetts with only 1,785 students, all full-time, almost all completely residential. So we don't have multiple campuses. We don't have a lot of the problems that any of the bigger colleges would have to deal with in terms of scale. However, because we're so small, we don't necessarily have lots of people who are dedicated toward creating web content. So it's like, you know, you're the department secretary for the history department, but you also have to maintain the website, you know. It's that sort of thing. And so we run into a lot of problems in terms of distribution of authority, trying to make sure that the right people have the ability to create the content. And back in, way back then, we didn't really have a lot of content, but now we have about 420,000 nodes on our site, 135,000 pages, 50,000 users altogether, and that's everybody is on the one site. Faculty, staff, students, alumni, even prospectives get an account on the site that they can use if they want to. And yeah, myself and there are only essentially two other programmers who really do the coding, and there's 2 other people in our department that do ancillary things having to do with the site. And I'll also mention right now that we have 24,000 permission groups. That doesn't mean anything right now, but you could think of it as roles in Drupal. Because we use permission groups for everything you can think of. Every single section of every single course in every semester gets a permission group. And because of the way Monster Menus was designed, that means that we can let students in that specific section of that specific course have the ability to create content that only the other students in the class can see. And nobody has to set this up. It's all done automatically. Now, why we wrote Monster Menus? Well, before Drupal, it was the Wild West, as I mentioned. People were creating content in Dreamweaver or just straight HTML. There was little consistency. It was very difficult to make a site-wide change where you could upgrade the look of the site simultaneously. But you already know this because that's basic Drupal. That's one of the big things that Drupal offered in the first place, is the ability to do that. However, permissions were another big thing. Because we have such a widely distributed content creation model, people were, creating their own htaccess files and having difficulty trying to understand how they work and why, if you can edit something at a lower level, you can't necessarily edit it at an upper level or vice versa. And it all gets very confusing. So what we set out to do, well, let's see. Actually, let me go back for a second. Some of the drawbacks of Drupal out of the box. Well, out of the box, you've basically got a flat site structure. Node/1234, node/2345. There's really not any sort of structure there's no easy way to indicate to the person coming to your site where they are semantically within it. And we've actually found that Google is really good at understanding site paths if you give it a really long URL and information that's very well structured on the page. It actually improves your SEO quite a bit. So we encourage people to do that by giving them an easy way to create a structure within MM. And I'll talk about that a little more in a moment. There's not an easy way in Drupal out of the box to show more than one node on a page. Now these days, people will install panels, or they'll install one of the other modules to do that. But you got to remember that we also started this back in Drupal 4.7, at which time things were a lot more difficult. And as I mentioned before, giving permissions to different people or groups, not only is that difficult to do, but it generally requires an admin, even in D7, unless you start going into OG or one of the other solutions that have come along to do that sort of thing.
I was going to ask why, well, at some point, did you guys consider doing everything in OG instead of using all the permissions?
Well, OG actually came along after MM, first of all, and even then, it's still not as flexible.
Right.
And at this point, there's no going back.
I understand.
The other problem is that the way that Drupal works out of the box, the permissions model just really doesn't scale. Things are stored in a table, and if you actually did the math, the amount of rows in that table that would be necessary in order to recreate what we've done would be astronomical. I think it would be more than what Google currently uses in order to store all their website data. One of the other things that was a requirement for us is this last bullet item, and that is to be able to easily mix external and internally facing content. So you can actually have a page that's deep within the site that only certain people can see. Whereas the traditional model of doing things is to have two separate sites. You have the intranet site and you have the internet site, and a very strict wall between the two. But we found that really wasn't flexible enough for our use case. So we decided to make that part of the model of the way that MM works. Along the way, we created the concept of a page. And we wanted to do that so that you could have any number of nodes that all appear on the same page, with pagination and other nice things having to do with that, so that you don't necessarily have to view them all at once. It's similar to the way that views can show you more than one node, but it's actually something that's built into the product, and the end user, the person who's creating the content doesn't really have to think about it. They don't have to write a view in order to get that. Nodes themselves, because they're just going into a container, the same node can appear on any number of containers. So that means that you can share content, the same piece of content, among different parts of your site. You could even have, something like the hours for a building that appears in every page of the area of the site that's specific to that facility.
So when somebody is embedding these nodes, are they picking them individually, or is it like in Views some query or a criteria, matching criteria that puts them there?
It's actually a part of the node edit form. So on the node edit form itself, you can say, well, by default, when you go to add the node, it lives within the parent page that you've specified that you're adding it to. But if you go in and re-edit the node, you'll see that you have the ability to specify any number of pages that node should live on, and you simply choose them from a tree browser.
Okay. So the parent page is also a node?
No. Pages within MM are a unique construct to it. It's a container that we've created out of thin air. So
your pages live in a hierarchy.
Right.
Each page you can have as many nodes as you choose.
Correct.
Oh, cool.
That works. You know what we have in panels?
I'm not that familiar with panels, so I can't really say. I'm sorry. I have to profess my ignorance on that. I can actually show you in a couple minutes. I've got a demo, and I'll show you exactly how it all works.
And this is a Drupal module.
Yes. And one of the other advantages is that you can specify a default theme for any section of the site. So if you had academic departments, you could have different themes that are specific to the history or the mathematics or the French department. Exactly. All right. I also want to talk a little bit about permissions. Every page can have its own permissions having to do with who can read the page, who can modify the page, and who can even create pages underneath that page. And that sort of goes to what I was talking about, having to do with the ability to freely intermix content that is supposed to be publicly visible and privately visible, only to certain people. You can apply individual users or any number of groups to a page in order to do those permissions. And by default, the parent container defines what permissions apply to everything underneath it, but you can override that as well. That's right in the page properties. One of the other really nice things that I hinted about before is that group editing can be delegated. That's really important because let's say, for instance, you've got the Quidditch club. And I, as an administrator, don't want to have to be responsible for editing the membership of the Quidditch club group every single semester when new students come and go from the club. So what I can do instead is just say, this person has the ability to do that. And that person can really be anybody. It can be any user at all. And in this case, it would probably be the chair of the Quidditch club. So he or she can then go in every semester and add in the individuals that are supposed to be in that group. And I don't have to do a damn thing. All right, miscellaneous stuff. Kitchen sink. We have the ability to turn a page, one of those containers of nodes, into a block so that you can repeat it on a set of pages. I hinted at that earlier, having to do with hours that might appear on all of the library pages, the same set of hours appearing. You can do the same thing with nodes so that you would have, well, you could have pictures or whatever, any sort of content that you want to be repeated throughout a section of the site. MM will also automatically generate navigation, and that's contained within a block too. So in the demo I'm going to show you in a couple minutes, you'll actually see that as I add new pages, they automatically appear as navigation items. Users can be limited when they're creating content to only certain node types or themes in parts of the tree. The reason we did that is that we wanted to make sure that things were less confusing. Why give somebody the ability to create some esoteric content type that really doesn't matter for their section of the site? And the same thing goes for themes. We don't want people trying to use the chemistry theme in the French department. And virtual groups are also a really neat feature. I mentioned about groups and their membership and the way that people can edit them themselves. But what if you actually had some database table that was already contained in your ERP system that has all the people contained in it who should be able to edit pages on the athletics website? Well, if you can get that into your SQL system, into MySQL in some way or fashion, in some kind of table, the virtual group feature just lets you write a SQL query directly within the settings of the group and tell it where the users should come from. And based on that, every cron run, if that group has changed, the list of users gets updated automatically. That's actually what we use when we're doing the membership for classes, class groups. And another feature that people had asked for was the ability to keep themselves from doing something stupid. So recycle bins for those oh shucks moments. Exactly. So anytime you try to delete a node or delete a page or an entire section of the tree even, instead of it being deleted immediately, it goes into recycle bin, which you can then pull it back out of if you need to. All right. Yeah. Well, what about multi-sites? I've been telling you all this stuff, and I've hardly even talked about multi-sites yet. All right, multi-site integration. One of the things that NM has as a feature is the ability to actually take multiple sites and put them within the same large tree. Now, in the case of Amherst.edu, to be honest, we don't actually even use this. We just have a single site that contains all this stuff. But if people are used to having chemistry.yourcollege.edu and library.yourcollege.edu and whatever else .yourcollege.edu, you can still have those multiple sites, but you can combine them into the same tree. The advantage of doing this is that lots of things can be shared then. You don't have to recreate the wheel every time. So if you had a node that you wanted to appear in 5 different sites, you don't have to recreate that node. You can simply refer to it, just as I said before, because nodes can live on multiple pages. That same node can be reused anywhere. The same also goes for permission groups. So your entire list of users and group membership can be referred to in any of your sites. That's extremely powerful because it means very little repetition, and it greatly reduces the amount of management you have to do.
You have a group of related sites. You can actually share all their content
Exactly.
in one tree.
The implications are infinite, aren't they? All right, and the biggest thing is the last point there. With only one set of code and one database, you only have to upgrade Drupal once. You run update.php once, and you're done. All right, so I am going to do my best here to call up a version of the site that I actually have running on my laptop here. And I've got 2 different
So if you were outside and you had different URLs, how do you get into the particular piece, the particular
which version of the site you want? Yeah.
particular heading, home page for the site if it's all in one place?
Well, you do it as you normally would in terms of creating a multi-site configuration within Drupal. So you essentially have 2 settings.php files, and that's exactly what I did here. So I've got one of them for this English site and the other for this history site, which both look very, very different.
And they're in the same database.
They're contained in the same database, the same tree, and you notice that they have almost the same URL. The Dru7 is there just because I was too lazy to point it to the root. But and they're just running on different port numbers. So one is on port 80 and the other is on port 81.
So you go in after the fact and spin off separate websites in the tree.
Exactly. You can do it anytime you want to. So in fact, what I'll do is I can show you right now. I'm not going to create another one right now, but I'll show you where that configuration is within Monster Menus by just logging in. I honestly never remember exactly where it is, so I'm just going to go over to Manage Sites. So here we can see that I've got, I don't know if you can see that very well. I guess you probably can. Is that okay? I might be able to make that a little bigger. All right, so I have English at Drupal U and History at Drupal U. And basically all you do here is you just say, I'm looking at this using the current, using the URL for history, so that's the current homepage for that one. If I were to do the same thing on the English side, it would, the radio button would be on the English box. And you can add any number of them here as you see fit whenever you create a new settings file, and simply access it there and create a new spot in the tree for it. And after you do that, you essentially end up with a page that you can edit where you define what the name of the home page is. So in this case, the site name here is History at Drupal U, and if I wanted to, I could change it there. And that becomes the new home page for that section of the site. So, having done that, let's take a look at some of the settings that you have available to you. Some of the page settings. Now, I talked a little bit about permissions groups, and this is actually where you can add them to a page. And if I wanted to, I can call it up here. Oh, you can, that's not terribly legible. Unfortunately, I can't do too much to make that bigger. But in any event, I actually only have 2 groups defined at the moment, in addition to the one for all logged in users, which is a predefined group. That's what I talked about with virtual groups. So let's say, for instance, since this is the history site, I wanted to give only the set of history admins the ability to add subpages to this area of the site. Well, that's exactly where I would do it right there. And I might even give them the ability to change the settings at the top level as well. If you ever want to know who the list of users is, you can just open it up there and it'll show you.
Oh,
yeah. I was trying to think of something related. This is also the same place where you'd set what the default theme is for this section of the site. In this case, I've chosen Garland just to show it off, show it as being visually different from the other one. Pagination is controlled here, and many other options. Having done that, though, let me just save the settings. Here is a subpage that I created earlier. Creating a subpage is actually also very easy. You just go here and say Add Subpage, and give it a name. It is, yeah. So in this case, I'm going to create another page, which will be a sibling of this Queen Elizabeth one. So now it appears over here automatically in the navigation. As you drill deeper in the site, you may decide that this menu is getting too deeply nested for you. And maybe you logically want to have it start over. And since, let's say, for instance, you've drilled down a couple levels and you're now at a specific history course. Well, what you can do instead is change the settings here and say that you want this to appear as a new subsection. And now, this particular subsection is being represented as the top level for this area of the site. You probably can't see it from where you are, but there actually is, in the URL here, we're at the subpage section. And yet, the other stuff is still at the top. So it's still within the structure, but if I click through, that now becomes its own section. for navigation
So
purposes.
you can keep your menu tree.
Getting too lengthy, basically. All right, let's see.
Okay, so now you have the submenu on this page.
Yep.
How can you show it on the other side?
Well, you wouldn't normally show, in order to do that, you've got a couple of options. You could copy that tree, and when you copy, you could either tell it to copy the content and actually create duplicate nodes if you wanted to. Or you could refer to those nodes. So let's give an example. Over here on the English side of things, I have this test page, which just has a few nodes contained on it. So each one of these is a separate node, and a couple pictures and a PDF file and a text node. So let's say over here, I wanted to refer to it over here, refer to one of those on the Queen Elizabeth I page. Well, I can come over to this side. I'm going to have to log in. Oops. All right, so if I edit the node, I can just say what pages it should appear on. So now you can actually see, hopefully pretty well, that the entire tree is represented here. So here's the English portion of the tree, which is where I'm starting at, and I want this same node to appear over in the history side. So assuming I have the right permissions, which I happen to because I'm the admin user, I can actually now say that I want to have that also appear over here on the Queen Elizabeth site. So now there are 2 pages listed. And if I reload that, now the node is over there. So I've effectively taken a node that was created for one site and repurposed it on another site as well. That's a reference. So, yeah. And, well, I don't know. Unless there are any other questions, I think that's the majority of what I wanted to talk about.
Have you, considering your large scale site, have you come up with any problems or running in MySQL, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we use MySQL. It's a pretty beefy server. I mean, occasionally we have slowdowns, but they're generally because of one particular query being run at one particular time. It's not so much because of monster menus. It's more often because of views. Views tends to be the worst thing in terms of performance. Yeah. We have some very complicated views that are used on our site because we use it for so many things.
Sorry, yeah. We run into performance problems with views, so basically we just rewrote our own.
Sometimes you have to do that.
How is this different from domain access module?
I'm not that familiar with domain access. Is anybody else? I would say that the major difference from what I know of it is going to be that you have much more granular permissions. So at any level of the tree, you can change the permissions. You're not limiting it just based on the site itself at the top level.
So the 24,000 permission or user groups that you have, how exactly does that work out? Or how does exactly that work?
Well, actually, let me mention this. The groups themselves are also stored in a tree. Whoops, if I spell it correctly, it is. All right, so in this case, I only have 2 groups, but if you want to, you can certainly add subgroups within these. And groups themselves, as I also said, have their own set of permissions, and that's what allows you to delegate the authority to add users to the groups. So we use a tree structure on our site, and we literally have those 24,000 groups are stored within a pretty well-managed tree of permissions. So, you know, we might have at the top level, we might have academic departments, history, 2014, 2015 fall, and then we would have History 101, History 101 students, and then that's, you know, going down the tree at each stage there. And people don't really have a problem finding the things because, generally speaking, first of all, we try to create sensible defaults for all the pages so that, generally speaking, they don't have to change the permissions. But even if they do, finding the right group to apply is usually not that difficult because it's pretty well organized.
So basically you or whoever is managing the humongous thing, all they have to do is see who fits where or handle the request of, I need permission to this group.
Basically, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we try to look at the, you know, the structure of the institution and sort of apply that to the groups that are contained. So
the physics department has, okay, the guys work on robots, the guy's working on lasers, the guy working on whatever particular particle physics. The guy that sits there can say, oh yeah, I can assign you to you're working on both lasers and robots and trying to combine the two, so basically you can give permission to both groups.
Absolutely. Yeah, you could do that. You can even give, you know, the person with authority in the physics department the ability to create groups. That's the other advantage. So that I don't have to create them. So he can decide what the structure of that whole section should look like, section of the groups tree. Sure.
That was.
It's one of the, you know, it's very difficult to describe all this, and you know, and I hope it's getting through. But the possibilities are really.
Your database must be large.
It is. It's mostly large though because of all the institutional data that we pull in. We actually do all of our user profile information management within it as well. And so we have, it's not just, you know, the very limited set of information that Drupal normally lets you have about users. We have probably 50 tables of information about any one particular person.
How many books they're written, how many?
Not so much that, but more, you know, their family members, what their previous employment, their all that sort of information, because alumni actually use this tool to keep the college abreast of changes in that sort of information.
Very cool.
So I'm sorry, I came in late. You're doing this with Monster Menus, which is a module, or is it?
It is a module, yeah.
And you wrote it, I assume?
Yes, I did.
So, Amherst, where is it exactly?
Western Massachusetts.
Massachusetts?
Yeah, so up in New England.
So you came from there? Are you based out of there?
Yeah.
So I guess you built this as a way to deal with issues with multi-site.
And scalability. Yeah.
So basically, you just have one site, but you have so much that you have so many departments, so many occasions, so many groups and things of that nature that you needed a way to better manage the hierarchy in a college institution.
Exactly. I mean, so much of Drupal, I mean, it's great at what it does, but it was never really designed with the concept of hierarchy in mind. You know, people use Path Auto or, you know, those sorts of things to sort of impose a hierarchy on it, but it isn't really there behind the scenes. So from the ground up, MM was designed with a hierarchy in mind.
Taxonomy apply to any of this?
Well, nodes can continue to have taxonomy, but it doesn't actually use taxonomy to store any information that's relevant to the structure.
How do you search the site for a specific piece of content? Did I ask a hard question here?
No, you asked an easy question. There actually is a search feature that's built in. This is an old version of the code which has a few PHP warnings in it. But in any event, one of the things that I wrote into it is, let's say, for instance, as someone with a little bit of power. I think we actually gave the search feature here to the average content creator also, but I'm not sure. Let's say you wanted to search for all articles with a title that contains March. Well, if I do that, oh, it's not on this side. But anyway, you can add multiple criteria in order to find things. This, of course, is not an end user search. You know, this is not something the end user would be using to search.
More or less the NMN type, or
yeah, or if you wanted to find content that was similar, you know, you're thinking to yourself, where did I leave that page? I want to be able to refer to it, and you know, reuse it, that sort of thing. As far as actual indexing of the site, I mean, we use Google. You know, we have a Google search appliance that searches our site, and that's what our search results are taken from.
Could you show the specific page group permissions?
Sure.
Could you show that? Okay.
So right here on this particular page, this is my test page. And right now I don't have any groups applied to it. You can either assign individual users if you didn't have a group that was defined, or you can add groups here. So I could add the English admins to this page. And now they have the ability to do whichever functions you tell. If you wanted to, for instance, prevent the outside world from seeing this page, you uncheck the read permission, and now only the English admins will be able to see this section of the site. And if you take a look here, there's a little padlock that we happen to add this in our theme, so that you know that this is a secure section of the site just at a glance.
Nice.
And it's not dependent on any other model.
No.
So you're basically getting administration, content sharing out of one module.
Yep.
All right. Do you deal with, I know it's going to be a weird question, do you deal at all with multiple languages or that type of thing?
We don't. It's that's actually something that we've wanted to look into. I don't know of any major reasons why it wouldn't work, but it hasn't been tested.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, it's quite likely. We actually do have a couple of significant users in other countries, and I'm not sure what they're doing right now. I think that they are doing sort of a multi-site version of it, where they actually have completely different versions of their site for the different language-based versions. So there's a Norwegian version and an English version of their site that are completely separate. That just happens to be how they decided to do it.
And in theory, you can have everything, including all the different language pages in the same place, just by you filter, you would
Exactly.
by whatever the default the person has, whatever language the folks have defaulted
In the URL, yeah, you could do it that way. And the other advantage of doing it that way is, as I mentioned, all of your images, they're shared, so you don't have to re-upload them. Sure. Thanks. Everybody, go play some games.